Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 4th of September. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open with a massive refugee crisis in Europe, where some 300 migrants broke out of a Hungarian border camp today, and hundreds of others set off on foot from Budapest as police gave chase and tried to keep control of the situation. This came as hundreds of others remained stranded at a train station in the East European country for the second straight day, demanding passage into Germany amid a standoff with riot police. The refugees spent the night inside of packed carriages after leaving the capital, believing that they were en route to either Germany or Austria. Hungarian riot police halted the journey just 35 kilometers west of Budapest, however, and ordered the asylum seekers go to a nearby camp for processing. Scuffles broke out when the migrants refused to comply because they were not interested in pursuing claims to stay in the economically depressed country, with some fleeing or even throwing themselves onto the train tracks. Some even reportedly refused food and water that was brought later by the police. According to a United Nations official, the migrants do have a right to know where they're being taken.
People have been misled in terms of where the trains are going. That would be a terrible thing. I think that information has been one of the weak problems, or one of the main problems so far, and it has to be addressed. People need to know, they deserve to know what's in store for them, where they are being sent, and to make the right decision.
European officials are coming under increasing pressure to take in even more refugees, particularly after the image of a dead Syrian toddler washed up on a Turkish beach that raised the emotional pitch of the crisis. Among those defending their nation's policies is British Prime Minister David Cameron, who said yesterday that his nation has been very generous regarding the issue, although today he changed that stance and announced that more migrants from Syria will be allowed to enter the United Kingdom.
Today I can announce that we will do more, providing resettlement for thousands more Syrian refugees. We will continue with our approach of taking them from the refugee camps. This provides them with a more direct and safe route to the United Kingdom, rather than risking the hazardous journey which has tragically cost so many their lives. We will discuss how best to design these schemes and the numbers we will take with NGOs and with our partners, and we will set out more details next week.
Due to the crisis, officials in Hungary and Bulgaria say that they're interested in purchasing Israeli-designed barriers similar to the one constructed on the Sinai border with Egypt, completed 2 years ago, in efforts to stop African migrants from crossing into the Negev, as well as to prevent raids by terrorists. Talks between Budapest, Sofia, and Jerusalem about buying such a fence are reportedly being hampered by political sensitivities in the European Union, where the building of separation walls is not only contrary to existing policy, but evocative of negative images of Cold War divisions in Europe. The cost is also considered problematic because it's likely to be about 15% more expensive per kilometer to build on the more difficult European terrain compared with that in the Sinai Peninsula. While both Hungary and Bulgaria are already building barriers on several of their borders, the Israeli models are far taller and more heavily fortified and also include more sophisticated electronic equipment. In other news, a Palestinian man saved 5 Jewish seminary students from Brooklyn from being lynched in Hebron last night after they took a wrong turn on the way to the Cave of the Patriarchs. The group entered the Palestinian neighborhood of Jabal Johar after having been misdirected by the Waze navigational system. A mob then surrounded the car and bombarded it with rocks, but the yeshiva students were able to escape from it before the Palestinians set the vehicle ablaze with firebombs. Fayez Abul Hamdiya, who lives in the neighborhood, said that he let the 5 Jews into his house after he noticed that they were being chased, and then used one of the students' cell phones to call police. The IDF came to escort them out about 40 minutes later in a coordinated effort between the Civil Administration of Judea and Samaria, Palestinian Authority security forces, and a police reconnaissance unit. 2 of the American tourists were lightly wounded in the face by glass broken during the attack. Jewish residents of Hebron are now demanding that the checkpoint that was only recently dismantled at the entrance to the Palestinian neighborhood be replaced. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon have announced that they will cut the rates of sales and corporate taxation. Starting on the 1st of October, the value-added tax will be reduced from 18% to 17%, while the corporate tax will drop from 26.5% to 25% in January. The move adds up to a combined benefit for consumers estimated to cost the state about 6.5 billion shekels and is coming under fire from Bank of Israel Governor Karnit Flug. During their joint news conference yesterday, Netanyahu and Kahlon said that the decision is designed to act as a growth engine for the slowing economy. Kahlon said that if an additional surplus is found after the reductions, taxes will be lowered even further. The announcement came a day after the Knesset approved the first reading of the two-year budget. Prime Minister Netanyahu intends to maintain his strong opposition to the Iranian nuclear deal, even though U.S. President Barack Obama has secured the 34th vote he needed to sustain a presidential veto. During a celebratory toast for the Jewish New Year at the Foreign Ministry yesterday, Netanyahu said that he will take his message to the American people, the overwhelming majority of whom he said see eye to eye with Israel on the dangers posed by Iran. He went on to say that it's important to instill in the American public opinion over the coming decade and maybe even beyond the fact that the Islamic Republic is an enemy of the U.S., which it openly declares. He went on to reaffirm the strong alliance Israel holds with the United States, stressing the important implications that the relationship has for Israeli security. Sources close to the Prime Minister say that he has no regrets for the manner in which he's waged his battle against the pact, including his controversial speech to the U.S. Congress in March. Meanwhile, since Netanyahu's statements at the Foreign Ministry, 3 more Democratic senators have declared their own support for the nuclear agreement, bringing the overall number to 37. 6 Syrian nationals critically injured in the ongoing civil war were brought into the country overnight for medical care at Israeli hospitals. A male victim in his 20s suffering a massive loss of blood due to severe wounds to his chest and stomach was evacuated by helicopter to the Ziv Medical Center in Tzfat, where he underwent emergency surgery. 5 others, including 2 women, were airlifted to the Rambam Hospital in Haifa. It's not yet clear whether the wounded were fighters or civilians trying to escape bloodshed in the Arab Republic. Meanwhile, United Nations war crimes investigators have released a report documenting atrocities committed by all sides in the Syrian civil war so far this year, urging that action be taken to stop the carnage.
Civilians are suffering the unimaginable as the world stands witness. Without the stronger efforts to bring parties to the peace table ready to compromise, current trends suggest that the Syrian conflict and the killing and destruction it wreaks will carry for the foreseeable future.
It's time for effective, timely, accessible action. We've called for this many, many times. And at the level of the Security Council, what you see is some responses on some fronts, but not a comprehensive, holistic response in regard to the dilemmas faced by people as a whole.
Moscow is delaying the international investigation charged with assigning blame for the use of chemical weapons in Syria. Russia's United Nations ambassador Vitaly Churkin made the announcement at a news conference, saying that the holdup is due to technical reasons. Russia currently holds the rotating presidency of the Security Council, which received a letter from UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon last week asking that the 15-member council respond within 5 days to his plan to launch a probe by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons that expired 3 days ago without action. According to Churkin, the Kremlin first wants written clarification from the UN on precisely how the investigation will proceed, particularly regarding the voluntary contributions for financing the mission, out of concern that the money, he said, might be used to influence the impartiality of the findings. President Rivlin was warmly greeted by Pope Francis at the Vatican yesterday during the first meeting between the two since Rivlin took office last year. Vatican sources say that the talks focused on the need and urgency to promote a climate of trust between Israelis and Palestinians, as well as the revival of direct negotiations toward the reaching of an agreement that is respectful of the legitimate aspirations of the two peoples. Also discussed was the plight of Christians in the Middle East, as well as the spate of attacks on Christian holy sites in Israel by suspected Jewish extremists. The pontiff presented the president with a bronze medallion featuring a rock split in two and held together by an olive branch emerging from the fissure, bearing an inscription reading, "Look for what unites, overcome that which divides." Rivlin gave Francis a stone tablet replica of the earliest known reference outside of the scripture to the House of David. The controversial clause added to the new public broadcasting bill on Wednesday, barring journalists at the Israel Broadcasting Authority from expressing opinions on air, is already facing cancellation following widespread public outcry. After receiving a letter from 15 senior diplomatic correspondents from across the national media spectrum last night, branding the addition as extremely offensive and seriously jeopardizing not only the journalistic freedom of the state broadcaster, but the very basis of democracy as a whole. The Prime Minister's office issued a statement this morning saying that the Premier, who also holds the communications portfolio, believes that ethical rules imposed on journalists should not be part of the legislation and that he will work to eliminate the clause. The Knesset is set to vote on Netanyahu's amendment to the law next week. The disputed addition was proposed by United Torah Judaism member of Knesset Israel Eichler at the last minute after a majority of coalition members voted in its favor Wednesday night. Well, it will be some time before Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas actually leaves office, despite his announcement this week that he will not seek re-election to the Palestine Liberation Organization or his own Fatah party. That's the belief expressed by the chairman of the board of the Israel-Palestine Creative Regional Initiatives Organization, Dr. Gershon Baskin, to IBA's Aryeh O'Sullivan.
Abu Mazen knows that he's lost legitimacy in terms of the longevity of his time in power from 2005 until today without new elections. And primarily, he's frustrated because he has failed to deliver what he promised. And what he promised was to deliver the end of the Israeli occupation, a Palestinian state, and he promised to do it through diplomacy, not through violence. He has been firm in his opposition to the traditional armed struggle of the Palestinian people. He has prevented violence against Israel. He has fought against terrorism, and he has cooperated with the Israeli security forces in doing that.
Well, the main question people want to know is who's going to replace him?
Well, he will presumably be stepping down in 2 weeks from the head of the PLO Executive Committee, unless, of course, he's called by Fatah not to do it. And he announced on Monday evening to the Fatah leadership that he wouldn't be running, and there were already calls from the Fatah leadership in the territories for him not to step down. Let's say he steps down, and that he does, and someone else is elected. It'll take time before there are elections for a new Palestinian Authority president. The main difficulty that they face there is whether or not they can have an agreement with Hamas to hold elections in Gaza and the West Bank. Abu Mazen has been firmly against holding elections only in the West Bank, as a step that would be seen as putting the final nail in the coffin of full separation between the West Bank and Gaza. I think they definitely want to see new blood come in. They're tired of being in the situation of stalemate, of stagnant political and economic situation. They don't perceive Abbas as having legitimacy because he's been in office for so long without elections and because he's failed to deliver. But on the other hand, there's no real challenge to his authority. I'm amazed always when I listen to Palestinian radio stations, both the public and the private stations, and I hear people who attack Abbas for doing this or for not doing that, but they always treat him with the ultimate respect in the formal Arabic language and call him His Excellency, the President Mahmoud Abbas, with the full title, and you hear no one on the streets of Palestine standing up and demonstrating against Abbas and calling for his removal. So it's a kind of bizarre situation. I think that people are also afraid to open up this can of worms, the Pandora's box of what's going to happen in the next generation of leadership. We know Abbas is the last of the founding fathers.
A rare 1,800-year-old sarcophagus was clandestinely unearthed at the building site of a new neighborhood in Ashkelon. The ancient 2.5-meter-long coffin of hard limestone weighs about 2 tons and features a large, elaborate carving of a life-size person on the cover. Its discovery was revealed during a joint operation of the Israel Antiquities Unit for the Prevention of Robbery and detectives from the Ashkelon Police Force who received a tip that contractors at the site took action to keep the authorities from finding out that they discovered the sarcophagus, causing irreversible damage in the process of repeatedly striking it with a tractor in their attempts to extricate it from the ground. They then allegedly reburied it under a stack of sheet metal and boards and poured concrete on top. 7 people have been detained for the failure to report and damaging an ancient discovery, including 5 Palestinian construction workers from Hebron. The Deputy Director of Operations at the Prime Minister's residence, Ezra Seidoff, has been called in for questioning by police over allegations of irregular spending. He will be interrogated under caution on Sunday, following the findings of Attorney General Jutta Weinstein, who last month ordered a criminal investigation into suspected financial irregularities at the residence, while stressing that neither the Prime Minister nor his wife Sarah are believed to have been involved. The call for an investigation came in the wake of a report released earlier this year by State Comptroller Yosef Shapira, detailing the lavish spending of public funds by the Netanyahus at both their official residence in the capital as well as their private home in Caesarea, and did allege that the couple may have been involved in wrongdoing. Police have arrested 2 additional mob figures, Steve and Shlomi Akrish, over suspected involvement in the 512 case related to senior crime bosses and heads of organized crime. The 2 are believed to have murdered well-known criminal Shlomi Levy in Ashdod 2 years ago, and their remand has been extended for another week by the Rishon LeZion Magistrates Court. Case 512 has resulted in the indictments of more than 20 underworld kingpins in recent months on charges ranging from murder to drug trafficking and money laundering. Dozens of mobility-impaired men and women held an emotional protest in front of the National Insurance Institute in Jerusalem yesterday against what they referred to as the humiliating monthly disability stipend that they receive from the state. The demonstrators appealed for a significant increase in the benefit package, saying that the amount barely enables them to live with dignity, and claiming that on many occasions that they're forced to give up basic food and grocery products just so that they can afford necessary medications. Turning to the appointment of hardline Likud minister Danny Danon as the country's next ambassador to the United Nations, which is being played down by veteran diplomat Yoram Ettinger, telling IBA's Ari O'Sullivan that the world body has lost its stature.
Well, in my mind, Israel should send its best representatives to areas where the marginal utility is high. At the UN, the prospects of marginal utility are extremely low, if at all available there. The UN is not a home court for America's interest. It's not a home court for Israeli interest. The UN is the home court of rogue regimes and countries such as in Europe, which basically lost it. Any effective diplomat should be sent primarily, in my mind, to the US, to the Israeli embassy or one of the consulates, and only then you think about the UN. Danny Danon, in my mind, very smart, very effective, very able. Unfortunately, I think his talent will be wasted in a very, very hopeless arena.
In financial news, the shekel today ended the trading week with a mixed performance against all major foreign currencies. And due to the closure of the stock market on Fridays, here's a look at the closing numbers for the week. The IBA weather team tells us that we can expect a beautiful day tomorrow with mostly sunny skies and no significant change in temperatures. Here's the forecast to home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow when I'll be back, same time, same channel, to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great evening and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.